common myth, I think, in mental toughness is that mental toughness and self-compassion are opposites, when in reality, they complement each other.
We sometimes talk about winning or learning, right? Instead of win or losing, win or learning. And so I think
because there is a difference between mental resilience and mental toughness. And the way that I typically describe it is,
you're listening to Mentor Moments, where we talk about all things counseling, technology, education, and career development. I am Braden Wooters, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Michael Keener. Grab a seat, and let's get started.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of Mentor Moments. My name is Braden Wooters.
And I am Michael Keener. Let's get this show on the road.
Were you like turning off all of your email notifications?
Actually, I was turning off Slack, but I didn't turn off email.
Is Maryville using Slack now a lot?
We are, yeah. So we've been using it for a while. We're still in this mode. It's like, okay, is this an email or is this a Slack channel? So many times you're doing both now. So it's supposed to save some work. And it does. It is a nice channel to do work in. And you can instant message. And actually, I have Slack channels for my courses now. And I put sort of additional content in there to keep people engaged in between classes. But yeah, so long story short, yes, we have Slack.
I'm surprised Maryville doesn't have Teams, like that. They're not making you guys use that instead.
Well, we had that for a while. We do a lot with Salesforce, and I believe Slack is part of Salesforce. So that's why
that makes total sense. Okay, well, let's catch up on life. We just chatted, like, I think last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. And we were just catching up on things, but what have we missed?
I will get 2 Missouri Rehab Association updates if we want for all our listeners.
Yes.
One, the Eastern chapter on April 24th, right? That's our annual awards banquet. Last year, we had the biggest audience all time, over 100 people. Again, it's our annual event. We celebrate the wonderful work of the rehabilitation community. Again, it's just a nice time to get together, have a meal, adult and kid beverages, buffet. Cheesecake is pretty good too, I must admit. Orlando's, we got to give a shout out to Orlando's on Dorset. And it's just, nice time we can hand out like 6 or 7 awards. And it's just nice when we get to do that and celebrate. So that's one good thing. And then the end of May, I believe it's 27, 8, and 9. It's the state conference, our annual state conference. Again, typical half day Wednesday, all day Thursday, half day Friday. Admission gets you 2 hot breakfasts, 1 dinner, 1 lunch. The resort at Lake is the Ozark. They're just a wonderful facility to work with, great views of the lake, but they just naturally, they have live music every night. Part of the now conference, we have live acoustic music in their bar area. We have actually a former Maryville professor, Dr. Gina Oswald, who works for Cornell now in their Disability and Employment Center. She's our keynote. We interviewed her as well by Brayton Glenn. Like, yes, I know, Dr. Oswald.
I know who that is.
And again, just think 20 sessions to choose from. We usually get 225 people. Good swag if you go. Anyways,
maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but is there a theme to this one?
We're all in this together. I mean, isn't that the truth? Like, let's be connected.
It is the truth.
Together, so that's our theme.
I love it. I mean, and speaking as somebody who's been to both of these events before, lots of fun. I very much highlights of. I've never been the biggest awards banquet kind of guy where I'm just like, okay, what's the point of all this? But I actually had a lot of fun, and it's a lot of entertainment, and it's a great moment where I learned so much about I didn't know that this was a service that was going on, and I didn't know that these people existed doing XYZ. So just great time.
Yeah,
definitely recommend.
Yeah. I put we have our new program is hybrid here at Maryville, and we have people from all over Missouri and Illinois. And I actually just threw it out there to come to the banquet. If you want to meet in person, here's an opportunity. So hopefully we'll get some new students to join or attend the banquet. And
yeah, well, it's the opportunity to dress fancy too. I don't know. That was one thing I really liked. I was like, oh, I get to dress a little fancier than I usually get to. So
yeah, I don't have to wear jeans. Well, now.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, what's
Any other
you?
updates? Oh, on me? Let's see here. Well, my birthday was last week.
I do
shot
remember
a
singing you
gun.
a happy birthday text.
You did. I shot a gun for the first time ever. What's the context for that? How do I explain that?
Was our
I
last
was thinking-
episode because you're getting arrested? Is that what's
No, how do I was like, more context is definitely needed. So I do this thing, and I've talked about this in previous episodes where I'll look at my year and I'll try to take like a step back and look at what I want to do in my year. What are the things that I haven't accomplished, experiences that I want to have? And I don't know why this was on the list. It just kind of felt right. I was like, you know what? An experience I've never had. I've never shot a firearm. I've been I think in some cases, very lucky that I haven't had to shoot a gun. And also shooting has never really been like a big thing in my family. That's never really, I mean, that's for some families, that's like a cultural thing where it's like, oh yeah, well, we just go out into the creek and we shoot guns together. But that's just not my parents. So I never was raised with that kind of, a piece to it. So anyway, realized I've never shot a gun. I feel like that's like, I don't think it's like a core experience that you're supposed to have, but it was definitely an experience. I was like, at least once.
Yeah.
At least to say that I did it, kind of putting it in the same vein as like skydiving.
Right.
Except
It's always good to have, you got to have knowledge on how to use it appropriately.
Yeah, knowledge and like respect for it too, because that's definitely one thing that I learned a lot more after that experience was like, oh, this is real, and this is real, and it's loud. I went with a couple of my buddies. It was an indoor firing range, and they really just like nothing to it. It's a little scary, given like all I had to do was like sign a bunch of waivers beforehand, give them my ID, and they were like, okay, what gun do you want to shoot? And there's no explanation. There's no like, here's how you fire the gun. Here's how you load it. Here's the safety. There was none of that. It was choose the gun. Okay, let's put it in a bin with a box of ammo. Here's some headphones. Go walk in there and go for it. And I'm sure that they were very much like, if you have questions, let us know. But of course, like, I don't know. Luckily I had like my friends with me who have shot, guns before. But the problem is that while they're trying to explain it to me, like, okay, like here's how you like where's the safety, where's the hammer and stuff like that, I have the headphones on and it's indoors, so I can't hear a damn thing that's being said to me while they're explaining this gun. Anyway, we ended up shooting 2 pistols first. I think it was like a 45 and then something else. I don't know. And after that, it was about an hour. And it's really interesting the people that you see at a gun range on a Friday night. Also, Good Friday. It was good. Yeah, it's very. I just the curiosity in me was like, what kind of person are you? To where this is like an everyday. Like there were people there that looked like they're here every Friday. Like they brought their own bag, they brought their own gun, they brought their own everything.
It's like bowling.
Clearly,
You got your own.
yeah, it's just.
Got your own bag.
That's exactly what it was like. The aisles or the lanes and everything. I mean, even the bowling analogy, I saw a couple there. Like they're clearly on a date together. So there was that. But very clearly there were some people that were taking it super seriously. Like this is like a sport for them. And then some people who, I guess Joe Schmoes like me that were going there for a birthday, I suppose. But that's the whole thing was like, I kept coming back to was like, there's no instruction at all. Very interesting. But anyway, we ended the night with a Desert Eagle. I didn't want to get like a too big of a gun, but that was a huge. It is just this ginormous pistol. Fired it once. That was all I really needed. I was like, oh, okay, this is intense, which was fine. I mean, it was okay. But anyway, we were there for an hour. Nothing too crazy, but yeah, it was a very interesting experience, and glad that
stuff. I'm glad you had that opportunity.
Have you ever? Have you ever shot a gun before?
Boy Scouts, yeah. I have I think it's the rifle merit badge.
Sure.
And then I don't know, I guess BB guns, I don't know if that count. I had like like a pistol, the cartridge.
Yeah, we had BB guns and like airsoft guns and stuff like that. I remember some buddies of mine had like paintball guns, which,
Yeah, my brother was more into paintball than I was, but yeah.
Right. But other than that, yeah. So super, interesting. Anyway, really loud, very, very, very violent. Trying to think of any other updates. Got the Cardinals game tomorrow night, which will be fun. I think that's really it.
Cardinals games or what?
I don't. Well, especially nowadays. There's not really too big of a reason to. I guess now I can because the tickets are a tad cheaper. But I don't know if you've been seeing, because this is the first season with the ABS system. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was so afraid because I remember like seeing the videos of it and I was like, oh my God, like this is just going to make the games like twice as long now. Like as if these games already weren't long enough. but I'll see them and it's amazing. Like it's changed the game essentially.
Well, again, the last few years, they started the pitch clock, so that speeds things up. And then they've been, maybe you know all this, they were test piloting the last couple of years in the minors, the
I didn't know that.
the automatic piloting there, and then you only have 2. You can only challenge 2. If you win the challenge, you keep the challenge. So there is that sort of strategy. So you just, again, I think that's part of why they didn't want to make it super long,
And as far as I understand, like only the catcher, the person batting, and the pitcher can challenge. Okay, so not the coaching can't.
No,
Nobody else can.
I think maybe the coach might say challenge that, and so then you have somebody.
Sure. Got it.
Correct.
Yeah,
those 3, from what I understand, the pitcher, batter, and catcher. And I guess from early data, the pitchers are the worst in predicting whether it was a ball or a strike, where the catcher and batter have a little bit more of calling it. So I guess if you're throwing it, we can understand where you think it's and you're farther away versus the catcher batter, you're a little closer.
I mean, all the videos I've ever seen of it have been like super accurate, where I'm just like, this is making umps look real bad. It's just the way that I'll watch them, like, oh my God. Like,
yeah, I did see one of the clickbait something on the internet, exposing the worst ump or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess I also heard too, where like if you're super tall, like I guess years before the strike zone was the strike zone. But now it also adjusts on how tall you are.
I was curious about that.
And so to give some umpires a little bit of credit, they're sort of adjusting to a new strike zone too. Yeah, that's human error. Because the ball's coming 90, plus 100, it's
interesting. Hard for me to tell. Anyway, that's all that I got on my end.
Segue talking about mental toughness, right? Getting into
mental toughness. This was a great segue.
And whatnot. Yeah.
Okay, yes, let's talk mental toughness. Full transparency, I have my PowerPoint up at the same time that we're talking, just so that I can have all my visuals with me. I gave a workshop over this with our student athletes here on campus here at Lindenwood, and I like the idea of mental toughness mostly because it kind of encapsulates everything. It feels like it's not just like one simple thing. It's kind of a blanket term, an umbrella term for all these other little kind of factors that go in. So I think before I get into like the nuts and bolts of it, like what do you think is like the general understanding around mental toughness? Like what it is, what it isn't? What do you think?
Well, I started calling it mental preparedness because I think that mental toughness, or I'm doing mental, like it then assume that you're not tough, right? And so to me, I just thought it would be reframing that a little bit. Like, we need to be prepared to perform under stress. And again, whether that's before, during, or after the competition, so again, what's our breathing technique, or what's our mindset? Are we doing visualizations? And, again, maybe I actually had somebody, a highly respected coach, referee, talk about, at least for wrestling, we talk about scripting everything or mental imagery and rehearsal, but like he only recommends the first 15 seconds because like how, other than that, like how can you really script a whole match? So I don't know, I guess I'll stop there. I guess I just like framing it as preparedness rather than tough. And then how do we prepare for competition, during the competition, and after the competition?
I love that. I think that you're touching on something that's important, and it's kind of what I like to start this whole thing with, is talking about if mental toughness is something that you're born with, if it's something that you grow in, like that you can actually train. Is it, because when you and I think, there's probably people in our minds that we think of like, this is a mentally tough person, but then there's also some people who I think like once you get to a certain age and people for a longer time, you're like, oh, this person's always been mentally tough. This person has always kind of had like that resilience, or I think another word is grit. So that's kind of what I like to start with a lot, is like talking about whether or not it's this character trait that you're born with, that some people have it, some people don't. It's like a spectrum, or is it something that's like trainable? And what we know about like the history of mental toughness, like from a like a research point, is that it started off more as a personality trait, which was more around the idea of like stubbornness is the trait that was typically like synonymous with it. That was like in the 1950s was when it started. started morphing. Different theories started to be presented, where then it kind of morphed from personality trait to something that can be developed, something that can be trained. And then these other models start to enter the mix, where we get the 4 C's. And these are 4 C's that you've probably heard of, that you've seen before, but it's from this researcher. That it's the hardiness theory is behind it. So a lot of what we talked about and what we talk about is those 4 pillars, those 4 C's. I can go through those 4 C's, but I want to pause for a minute and to give the definition that we typically use, or the model uses. The model typically defines mental toughness, and I'm going off of my PowerPoint to make sure I know what I'm saying. It defines mental toughness as a personality trait that determines in large part how people deal effectively with challenges, stressors, pressures, irrespective of circumstances. So preparedness definitely goes into that, but it is different from resilience, and I like to get into that in a minute. So, any guesses what any of those 4 C's would be?
Well, wrestling, we only had 3: cool, calm, and collected.
I like those.
I also talked about, I know you said preparedness. I had 3: prepare, perform, and persevere. But so I don't know, is
Confident is one of them. Yeah, you got it. Yeah. So the 4 C's that we talk about, one of them is confidence, and they split it up into 2 different kinds of confidence. There's one, your confidence in your abilities, the ability to go, okay, I know what I'm able to do. I know that I'm capable of doing X, Y, Z. And then the second confidence that they like to talk about is interpersonal confidence, the idea that I can stand up for myself against adversity, or if coach makes a decision that I feel a certain type of way about, then I have the confidence to ask more questions about it, not to challenge them too much, but obviously I have the confidence to call out a teammate if they're performing inadequately. And so those are like the 2 pieces of confidence. Let me make sure that I have everything here with that confidence. Yeah. So definition, and essentially we talk about like what are ways to build internal confidence in yourself. A lot of that is kind of that CBT, like looking at the evidence piece, like what is the evidence that you are capable of doing XYZ. I find a lot of times it's with like my freshman athletes that I have to do this a lot with, where they believed that they were this amazing athlete, and they still are. That hasn't changed, but now they're not the best on the team anymore. They went from the best in their hometown to now they're a D1 athletics, and they're not the best, and it's a big shift. Confidence just goes out the window because we're not getting that feedback that we usually get. And then interpersonal confidence. I could talk for days about this, and I'd like to make it my own like PowerPoint workshop, is just coach and player dynamics. That is so, I forget so much how important that is and how much that affects just ability to perform. Does my coach like me? Does my coach not like me? My coach got mad and yelled. Does that mean that he doesn't like me, or is that just the way that he is? Coach is giving this player a lot of attention. Does that mean I'm doing something wrong? So anyway, I'm going to pause on the confidence piece. Am I touching on things that you've seen? What are you thinking?
100%. I mean, I do think, again, the student athlete coach dynamic is huge. And even just, I often think about being injured and feeling like maybe I can't disclose an injury because I'm going to lose my spot, or I need to, fight with that. And again, just things you've already said, wherever you were before, if you were the big fish in a small pond, and now you're the whatever small fish in the big pond, or whatever you were.
Mm-hmm.
But again, just the change, and every time you go up a level, obviously there's less and less people who are following you, but the competition can be greater there.
Yeah. So like confidence being a piece of mental toughness. And the second C that we like to talk about is challenge. And I like to talk about challenge quite often because challenge is where we find a difference between, I think, plain old resiliency and mental toughness, because there is a difference between mental resilience and mental toughness. And the way that I typically describe it is, I have found that mentally resilient individuals are people who have experienced really, really tough things. Sometimes it even borders on like the traumatic things we've experienced. So people who are mentally resilient have this ability to harbor a lot of stress and mental anguish. The difference between somebody that's mentally resilient and mentally tough is that a mentally tough individual pursues challenge, whereas a mentally resilient individual has the tools to be able to manage stress. They accept stress, whereas a mentally tough individual pursues stress and pursues things to make it a challenge. And we've already talked about this before whenever it comes to flow and making things difficult enough to enter flow. We're at a point in the school year now where I don't think a lot of my students are really wanting to pursue challenge, which I really don't blame them. We're in struggle season right now where it's the last, 5 weeks of the school year and people are just ready to be done. But that is something that I do keep coming back to, which is that idea of challenge and what is the difference between burnout and challenge and managing those things. So thoughts on that second C?
I actually think that's pretty accurate, that the mental toughness side of the challenge is actively seeking out the challenge. Like, how are you approaching this to continue to get better? Like, we do need to challenge ourselves in that way. Or, again, maybe this is sports speak, but like wrestlers, you said, we got to put the guy in deep water, or you got to train harder, like so exhausted in deep water to burn out your lungs. So then when you're actually competing, it's sort of quote unquote easier, right? So how do we, again, have them embrace that challenge in that safe environment, if you will, to then sort of feel like, and you're in overtime and you're fresh and the other guy is going to be fresh because you haven't been to deep water. All that kind of stuff.
I think of pressure training, I think a lot of my athletes, they're able to, I think, perform better during practices because despite the toughness, despite the physicality of it maybe being more intense than maybe a game would be or a match would be, the stakes are lower in a practice. I've got a couple of like runners who will tell me, well, I psych myself out during meets because those are the races when my times matter, as opposed to my practices when they don't matter. And so I do come back to that idea of like pressure training, which is, okay, they're probably running you to the ground or not running you to the ground. The effort is higher in practice, but also it doesn't, if you perform poorly, the stakes aren't as high. You have less to lose by going all out or by, changing things in practice. So that is something that I return to a lot, which is adding stakes to practices and such. The last thing that I'll add is vocational. We're talking a lot, I think, sports related in this episode, but I do come back to like vocation, which is, not saying that I'm skipping ahead and giving mentor moments already, but it is, I do wonder about when was the last time that we ask ourselves, are we challenging ourselves in our job? I can easily fall into the trap of, taking it easy and getting my bearings, but how often are we doing that with ourselves in our everyday? So a third C, where are we at? Okay. Yep. The third C of mental toughness is commitment. And commitment is one of those really interesting words that it's like, okay, I think I have an idea of what we mean, but I'm just not entirely sure. Like it is the foundation of consistency. So a question that I was asking my athletes was, what does an athlete with low commitment look or act like? And we would talk about, what are the behaviors of somebody with low commitment? How do they behave and communicate to other people? It opens up the question for commitment to what? Commitment to your sport, commitment to each other on your team, commitment to, perfection versus excellence. There is, a difference between the two. A commitment to, it asks, what are you committed to? So are you committed to being the flashiest on the team? Are you committed to just a numbers game where you want the best stats and that's all that matters? So it is kind of a bit more of an introspective idea of commitment, but it also kind of feeds into the challenge piece, which is, what does a high commitment response to quote unquote failure look like versus a low response?
Yeah, well, I like the idea when you said, what does a high commitment person look like? It makes me think of, are they committed to do all the things? Like not just practices at 4:00, so I stroll in at 3:59. Are you there? You're getting making sure you're getting treatment. Meaning if you got any bumps and bruises, that you're getting that fixed. Are you there to make sure practice is ready to go, whatever that means for whatever sport? Are you willing to put in an extra workout? Not everybody's competing, if we're talking about college athletes, at a fully funded D1 program. So programs, you're fundraising, obviously you're still a student athlete. And so if you're not committed in the classroom and you don't have good grades, you're not going to be competing. And, when the competition. So again, that holistic commitment.
I'm thinking back to the way that I described it, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators, and like how that goes into commitment. So an extrinsic commitment being like, oh, well, I'm committed to not making my coach mad at me. I'm committed to making my parents proud of me. I'm committed to the scholarship that I'm getting. So I'm committed to the way it looks at a D1 school. So these are more or less extrinsic things that are outside of ourselves. And then we talked a little bit more about those internal commitments that are more value driven, that are more value based, and really tapping into those. And of course, I mean, I don't really have to explain it too much, but I think that we both know that depending on the person, typically an intrinsic motivator is it gets you more mileage than an extrinsic motivator, and that is definitely like an intrinsic coping skill, an intrinsic tool to tap into, that I think once you get to the end of a school year, we're like, why am I even doing this anymore? I'm toast. I'm dead. I don't want to keep doing this. It is that kind of cliche of returning to your why. Why are you doing this in the first place? That's what I got.
Made me think of the difference between process and outcome, because like you can have a great performance and still lose. And then you could sort of make mistakes and still wins, sort of not to make it solely on the outcome, So again, I think maybe you talked about, maybe this goes to the other point of how do we frame when we win or lose, right? So how do we sort of approach that side? But I might be getting in the weeds there a little bit.
Oh, because we talk about this all the time, which is, I mean, exactly what you're saying, I agree with. And I see, I mean, that starts with the coaching staff. That starts with being modeled by the coaches, which is, how does a coach respond to a win and a loss? How does that, if there's a loss, then how is the coach responding? Is it all data? Well, we lost because of X, Y, and Z. Like, are they talking about the pros from the game, that match? There are some coaches that are strictly outcome based, which is, for the most part, an extrinsic motivator. It is an extrinsic commitment. I'm committed to winning. That means I'm committed to the numbers that are on that scoreboard. And then you get coaching staff that's a little different, that I think, I think Maryville's wrestling team is a great example of this, where it is very much more, I think, a values based, a very intrinsically committed, I think, community and culture that's there. That it's not, I mean, the numbers follow, the wins follow, but they typically follow after the values come first. That's typically what I've seen in terms of long programs that have lots of success. Okay, the fourth C, and this is the one that I spend the longest on. The why, and I'll explain in a minute why I spend the longest on it, but the fourth and last C is control. And control gets split up into two types of control. There's life control and there's emotion control. I spend a majority of our workshop talking about emotional control. And I do that because whenever they were developing this whole model for mental toughness, they ended up developing an assessment where they were able to assess for mental toughness. It was no longer this thing that was just like, this person looks mentally tough, and I don't know, I know it when I see it. They created a 48-point assessment, self-assessment, where athletes can complete it, and they were able to see, the times in which they were self-scoring themselves as mentally tough and versus not mentally tough. And what they found was that 60% of the variance in scores came strictly from emotional control. So it goes without speaking that emotional control is a huge piece of mental toughness. And I can say that and be like, well, yeah, duh. But there's so much that goes into it. So the first piece, of course, is life control, though, which is, I think, a very therapeutic piece that we like to talk about, which is that kind of locus of control. The beliefs that, you can make a difference and change things through your own efforts, but being able to identify the things that are in your control, that are out of your control, the things to focus on, the things to accept, the things to kind of minimize, the things to ignore. That is, I think, a skill and a tool that a lot of my athletes, I think, practice every day, but they're just not aware of it. It's things that we practice. Every human being typically has to practice these skills, but it's one that we don't really think about too often. So I'm going to pause for a minute with everything that I'm saying, but we do talk a little bit about life control, about those things during games, during performances, or during practices that are high in control and high in our in importance. Then we spend a lot of time on, and then we shift everywhere else. So I'm going to drink my water now.
Drink your water. Stay hydrated. That's important.
Yes. What are your thoughts?
I couldn't agree more. I guess I've not necessarily broke it down, but we often, again, control what you can control. Mm-hmm. I've talked a lot about optimal versus perfection. I can't tell you how many well, this happened at practice or this happened at a competition. Well, we're never going to have the perfect situation. So how do we perform optimally? Like, how do we still
Mhm.
perform when we're not at our best? And so some of that is really sort of controlling what you can control. I can't control who I'm competing against, or if, you know, walking onto the mat, I stubbed my toe, or so you just sort of, again, control your breathing,
Mhm.
mindset, again, try to stay in the moment.
When we get into emotional control, I think the best way that I explained it to our athletes was on a pendulum. I always like to come back to a pendulum. I feel like that's just like a great graphic. It's one that's easily understood, and it applies to so many different things. And so when it comes to emotional control, what I found with athletes that are trying to, or just people just in life with stress and stuff, I find that the pendulum will end up in one of two places, and it's very rarely in the middle. On swinging all the way to my left, I see, a complete crash out, essentially, which is responding to every emotion that comes my way. An emotion happens in my brain, and there is no pause between an emotion and a behavior. And I am at the whims of whatever I'm feeling. So if I'm feeling really, really good and feeling awesome, I'm on top of the world. If I'm feeling really awful, then it is incredibly evident, and there is no limit. There is no stopping it. So if I'm really happy, then I'll go crazy and be awesome, and I'll be a lot of fun to be around. Same thing with anger. If I'm really, really angry at myself, angry at the coaches, angry at my opponents, it's really obvious with my behavior. Sometimes that looks like, punching things. So it looks like yelling. It looks like dirty looks. It looks like, you can just see the emotions all over you. I don't have to go too much into detail on this, but we both know that is, regardless of the ethics behind it, of if, that's good or bad, it's not going to be optimal. It's going to be energy that is distracting. It's going to be energy that's not being put towards performance typically. So it's one end of the spectrum. What I find on the other end of the spectrum is this term called expressive suppression, where it's essentially, okay, I'm feeling a lot of emotions, but I'm not going to do anything behaviorally with them. So the emotions are still there. I can't turn those off because I'm a human being. So things will happen, come my way. Either a really good thing will happen, a really sad thing will happen, something happens that I don't agree with, but I'm not going to react to anything. And I'm not going to react at all. So I'm going to be almost robotic. So this, I don't even want to use the word stoic because I don't think that that's appropriate, but I am just not even there almost. I've seen athletes go too far that direction. What we found is that even that is not as helpful. That's also wasted energy that we're putting towards keeping this demeanor that isn't even really fully authentic either. What was the data? Where's my data? Hiding emotions, toughness, stoic. I'll find it later. But one thing that we teach more on is that middle ground, which is this thing called cognitive reappraisal, which we'll get into in a minute. But I want to know, have you seen this? Have you tried to be either of these two?
Well, again, I when you were first talking about it, to me, it sounded like emotion regulation. So how are we, again, taking in data and staying in the moment? And again, as you're saying, not letting any of the extremes get in the way. It also, again, like, to me, like we talked about flow, it's like when you're in the moment, you're probably squarely in that middle because you're really not experiencing the emotion, right? You're just sort of reacting to whatever, the competition or competing. So
Yeah. I feel like flow is like when the pendulum just starts to like literally float away. Like it's no longer gravity. Like it's not even on the spectrum anymore. It's just kind of up there. Because then you're not even really experiencing the emotions, or you are, but it's not even really registering at that time. A lot of times I have to, I think a lot of my athletes get really scared to emote. Something bad will happen or good will happen, or they'll perform a certain way, and it's almost like that they're fearful of showing that they're angry, or they're fearful of showing disapproval of something. And what I'm trying really hard to do with my athletes is to validate it and to let them know that, like, hey, if something happens and you gotta like ball up your fist for like a couple seconds, that's okay. Like if something happens and you gotta, cuss under your breath really quickly just to get it out, like that is okay. There is some level of expression that tends to be needed to be able to go on to the next steps. And so it's a very rudimentary kind of simplistic 4 steps that we talked about, but it's these, like, those 4 F's. The first F is the F-bomb, which is essentially get it out of your system. Whatever you need to do, don't go balls to the wall, but do what you need to do to get it out of your system, almost like to let your nervous system let it pass through. That second one, because you got to do that to be able to go to step 2, which is fix it. If you're not doing step 1, then you're going to be stuck tight and you're not going to be able to focus on anything else, which is if you get rid of step 1 and you get through step one, then you can go to step 2, which is solution focused. Okay, fix it. What did I do wrong? What went wrong in that moment? Okay, I've identified it. Okay, you've done it. You've done the work as the athlete. You've identified what's wrong. Okay, the third step, and like I said, easier said than done with all these steps. The third step, forget it. That's I wish I could spend a whole hour on how to forget things, on how to forget, a mistake that's being made. And then the fourth one is focus. Okay, so I forgot the mistake that happened. The fourth one, now I gotta come back to where I'm at. I gotta reestablish where I'm at, see how I can apply it to the next one and move on. What I'm describing is really difficult. It's really difficult in a game. It's really difficult to do it to yourself. And it's really difficult whenever other people are involved, whenever coach is reminding you of the mistake that you just made, or you're doing it whenever you're embarrassed because of who might be watching you do XYZ. Again, rudimentary, but it is kind of it gives permission, I suppose, to go through these steps. Because I do think that whenever you get into suppression, then it's hard to go through the fix it and the forget it and the focus. More water. What are you thinking?
Well, I guess I've talked a lot about like, how do we reset, which is, I guess, the refocus. So whether it's, again, a lot of these are, well, I guess we could take a baseball example, right? And maybe this is also forgetting, if you're a relief pitcher, just gave up a home run, you need to sort of have to refocus and forget that by the next pitch. And so certain sports, there's a little bit more of an opportunity, in tennis, is there, okay, in between points, can you sort of, okay, and then what do you do? Wrestling, there's not halftime, there's not a timeout. So a lot of times you have to do it in the moment, or if there is like a whistle, you out of bounds, is there something that we sort of make mechanical? Okay, I'm adjusting my socks, or
exactly
taking a deep breath or something to sort of, okay, this is I'm resetting or refocusing and just moving forward.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is something that we talked about, which was like, what's a behavioral piece, like almost like a reset trigger that you can do. I have found some success in another person being a reset trigger. Now, you take a risk because we can't put like all of our emotional weight on, hey, I need this person here to reset me. But I do think that is something that gets missed a lot, which is the co-regulation piece. It's really easy for us to co-regulate with an individual. Yeah, co-regulation. It's really hard to reset, I think, by yourself. Sometimes it's easier to have that person to kind of like reset, or just to go to somebody on your team. Maybe it's a coach, maybe it's a teammate that you trust, to go to them. And if you've got that, the F-bomb, give it to somebody else. So, get angry. Don't get angry at that person, but having that person to kind of co-regulate with, be like, okay, we're resetting together. It's time to move on. It's easier to move on and fix it and forget things when you have the validation from somebody that you trust to say, hey, it's time to move on. Let's do this together, as opposed to doing it by yourself. So that is just an extra piece that I like to share with other, I think that's something that gets undervalued quite a lot. Anyway, a lot of our workshops are, at least the workshop with this, what I'd like to do is just a workshop just on looking at sports clips, sports highlights of what not to do whenever it comes to emotional control. There's so many, YouTube compilations of athletes going way too intense and letting their emotions run crazy. There's not a whole lot of ones where emotions are stagnant, but I think one thing that I typically end this workshop on, and that is that emotional control isn't easy. I explained this, it's really easy for me to find YouTube clips of athletes going aggressive, going like absolutely getting angry and throwing stuff around. It's so easy to find clips of that. It's a lot harder for me to find clips of athletes staying cool under pressure and like bouncing back from a mistake. And that's typically because that happens over an entire season. That is a season-long, I think, long-term behavior that is harder to see in one game. It looks like, hey, I just have been messing up for the first half of our season. How do I bounce back from this? Or I keep screwing up defensively, and I've been screwing up defensively for the last 6 games. How do I bounce back from this? That is more of a long-term thing that I see, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to bounce back because I just made a mistake and the last play ago, it's time for me to that's more difficult to do. And I think I like to kind of reframe this, that, hey, this is like you are playing the long game here, just to kind of reframe that. Thoughts with all that?
I don't know if I have any more thoughts. I do like taking the longer view of things. And again, I don't know if this is helpful or not, or just wordsmithing. We sometimes talk about winning or learning, right? Instead of win or losing, win or learning. And so I think I'm not to that long view. And again, so to me, well, I don't know, maybe we're still I'm just thinking about process versus outcome. And I often, when I was a young coach working with really like high school athletes who's never really competed before, having them self-assess, like, again, the wins and losses might not be there, but have you scored points? Have you pinned somebody? Did you even just wrestle a complete match winner? What are these smaller milestones? Maybe again, that's that solution focus. Small steps leads to bigger steps. So then they can sort of see change, or even, something was helpful with really early career athletes or young career was, are you better now than you were when you started the season, right? So even though wins and losses might not be there, but in theory, right? And so again, to me, longer view there and develop maybe a little bit more.
And I think if I were to do a part 2 to all this that I'm talking about, and it's something that I've been kind of stuck on, I guess, is where does self-compassion fit into all of this, into mental toughness? But, a common myth I think in mental toughness is that mental toughness and self-compassion are opposites, when in reality they are complement each other. And I think the reason why I'm so stuck on this is because whenever I ever bring up self-compassion to athletes, especially like younger individuals here in the college setting, they have a very difficult, I'm talking anecdotally right now. They typically have a difficult time defining self-compassion. Like, they're able to kind of give an idea of like what is self-compassion, but talking about it in like an actual functional sense of like, okay, how do you practice self-compassion? What does it look like? I get typically a whole lot of, and I think that is just so interesting to me. I think that because compassion is typically modeled growing up to be received from other people, it's a lot more difficult for, I think, young people, and especially perfectionists, type A individuals, to do it themselves. It's almost like this weird foreign tool, this foreign language. And anything that's even like resembling it, or whenever I present it, it's very common for it to be received with an eye roll, or like with a little bit of like cringe to it, of like, okay, like, I'm what? And so that is where my brain is going if I were to do like a part 2 of this, if I were to keep going deeper, which is like, where does self-compassion fit into this? How has it been modeled? What does it look like? How has it been shown to other people? What are you thinking?
Oh, the only thing that made me think, I had worked with a student athlete that I think was told for so long that they're a head case, that then again, they started internalizing that, or it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, or any mistake was because, well, I'm not whatever. What we worked on was, again, just maybe from a simple counseling, it was a reframe. What if actually you were the best mentally prepared athlete and not the worst one? Because look at all that you're doing. I mean, who else is spending this much time really thinking about being mentally prepared? And I think that was a little bit of a breakthrough. So again, maybe to me, I guess I hear self-compassion. You're like, I'm going to like, give me some credit for the work that I'm doing versus only not good at this. And this is the reason why. Absolutely. To like somebody that sees a diagnosis and then they think I can no longer change because I'm this, versus somebody who maybe has a diagnosis and then maybe has a plan now, right? So again, how do we view our, I guess, the environment that we're in? So,
and I think I'm going to write my next like newsletter on this is the preliminary stuff that I have done regarding self-compassion. The one term that keeps coming back up to me and I keep reading and keep coming back to is the term warmth. And I'm so interested in that. The idea of like being warm to yourself. And whenever I think of warmth, of somebody that's warm, I'm like, oh, it's like an old person. That's like my grandma. My grandma's warm. I'm not warm. That's my yapping. That's mental toughness. I feel like we covered a lot of ground.
There we go. Yeah, I'm interested to see what kind of dialogue we get because of this. Until next time.